Hello and welcome to Food for You and the Planet, a fresh new podcast that explores healthy and environmentally sustainable food solutions. This podcast is brought to you by Healthy Plan Eat Online Farmers Market. I'm Dr. Rosemary Ostfeld and I'm your host. Together, we'll hear from leaders in environmental science, agriculture, medicine, nutrition, entrepreneurship, and more. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to hear all the latest in healthy and sustainable food with Food for You and the Planet. Today's episode features Holly Arbuckle, CEO and co-founder of Singing Pastures. Holly and her husband John own and operate Singing Pastures. John is a ninth-generation farmer from the Midwest. They saw a gap in the market because there was a lot of grass-fed beef sticks, but no pasture-raised pork. They started a brand in 2016 with no initial investment. Holly owns 51% of the company and is the CEO who runs the brand, while her husband is the primary farmer and COO. Their current home farm is in Maine. Thank you so much for being here today, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me, Rosemary. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Great. So let's start off. What is Singing Pastures and what types of products does it create?
So, Singing Pastures is our home farm in Midcoast, Maine. We're about an hour north of Portland. And we are primarily pasture raised pork at this point. We've done a lot of different kinds of farming, and I can get into our long and colorful history. But we started out farmers market restaurant farm, and now we primarily are focusing on multi species grazing. So, we have our pigs, but then we also have um, partner farms, like young farmers that use our land, and then they barter, for helping us out with different projects on the farm. So we've also had sheep and cows this past summer, and next summer we're going to also be doing a project with Stone Barns, which is a big nonprofit farm out of New York. And we're doing a partnership with them. We'll also be doing layers and yeah, I'll talk about that later, but we have a grant going on with them.
How did you and your husband become interested in a career in sustainable food and agriculture?
So I married into it. So I'm from a rural area and I grew up with a lot of farmland everywhere, but like most of the country, it was corn soy. My husband actually grew up on a corn soy farm in Illinois, so conventional agriculture. And he's ninth generation, as you said in the intro. And his father, who he farmed with, developed Parkinson's in his 40s. And at that point, John decided that it was probably because of the chemicals, because Chuck was a chemical applicator. And Chuck went on to live a long life with Parkinson's. He did very well. And that is awfully young to get that kind of debilitating disease and have it affect the rest of your life. So early on, John decided that he was going to pivot to sustainable and now regenerative agriculture. And he went to college in Fort Lewis and did a self-design in sustainable agriculture. And then he went off and did a bunch of other stuff, like as a mountaineer and raft guide for many years, knowing that he wanted to come back to farming. So by the time we met and then got married, he was like, "This is what I'm going to do now." So we started at CSA on the Chesapeake Bay region where we were working, and he started some of his projects. And then we bought our first farm actually in Missouri. We were there for 8 years, where we raised our two kids before we moved here in 2018. So there's a lot of details. So I'm going to just let you decide where you would like to dig in, because we've been a lot of different things over the years.
Well, how about we start with how did you start Singing Pastures?
So we were singing Prairie Farm in when we were in Missouri. So we moved there in 2010. And that was a farmer's market farm. We were doing egg layers. We had like 500 egg layers. We did pigs at different times. We custom grazed other people's cows. We had a big garden. We were actually living in we had bought an Amish farm. So I was also raising my baby and my toddler and working an off-farm job as an acupuncturist um, in a non-electric house. So it was doing the, whole back to the land homesteading thing. So we did that for years. And I think probably, as you know, and many of your listeners know, it is awfully hard to make a living farming. So the statistics that I'm aware of are that on small, medium-sized farms, so anything under like, $1 million, right, 80% of the income comes from off farm. So he's working, she's working, whatever combination of the family has to work to be able to make the farm go. So when I realized that, it was both shocking and it was also like a relief because I'm just like, okay, it's not just us. Like it's really, really hard to make a living farming. And so that's when we started a value added product. It was about 2016. And then we took that and we moved to this farm in Maine. We moved here in 2018. So Singing Prairie became Singing Pastures because once you're in New England, you're not really in the prairie anymore. So that we kept the farm name, and that's actually also the name of the brand.
Can you tell me a little bit about your farm in Maine and some of the sustainable agriculture practices you implement?
Sure. Our farm in Maine is about 170 acres, and it's an ex-dairy farm. And like a lot of dairy farms in the New England and in the Midwest, the smaller dairies have been driven out of business by the really large industrial CAFO dairies out of California and Nevada. So this farm was on the market for 2 years. The farmer before us, is multi-generational. He had held on to it as long as he could, but the way that he needed to hold on to it was to put more and more cows on the land to try and keep his production up. And I know that when we bought it, the manager had told us that they were getting the same milk prices they had gotten in the 1970s, except of course everything else has gone up. So it would just wasn't working, right? So when we bought the farm, the land was tremendously overgrazed, and I have compassion for all farmers who are just trying to make a living and, take care of their families. So we started out at it was pretty bad. There were huge bare spots. There were a lot of invasive species. Um, we had a biologist come and walk the farm and say this is some of the worst farmland I've ever seen. And so where I can be encouraging for people that are listening is that because John and I have studied regenerative agriculture with places like the Savory Institute, we studied with soil health consultants, which is Ray Archuleta. At the time, it was Ray, Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, those guys. And we had also done it on our previous farm. We had done regenerative agriculture and had tremendous results. We had the hope that it would work here also. And here's the good news. We've had it since 2016. So what is this? We've been here like 7, 8 years, and there is a tremendous difference. We have been able to get the ground covered again in grasses. We've done silvopasture where we've planted apple trees and peach trees and nut trees and oaks and all kinds of different species along contour lines. And we've seen just a total reemergence of a grassland bird population here, primarily bobolinks, which is a grassland bird population that is on the watch list, which is one below endangered. So we've started doing bird counts here on the farm. So what I can say is that the really wonderful part is nature always wants to bounce back. It really does. You just have to manage it, with biomimicry to give that land permission. And for us, that is with grazing animals. So we do, rotational grazing. So there's different terms. Some people talk about adaptive grazing, holistic grazing. But the basic idea is you want to keep the animals clumped and moving. And you're doing that with electric fence, and they go from one place to the next. And you're using a combination of art and science to figure out how long you keep them in one spot before you move them on. But that is what really triggers that regrowth is that positive animal impact where the animals poop and pee on the land, and they do some grazing, but you don't let them graze it down to the ground. They don't take it all the way to the little nub, so you're trying to leave at least a third of the vegetation, the bottom third, so that you can keep that root structure intact. And it just created this total, bounce back effect. And so we're all about healthy soil, I guess. That's if I guess if I wanted to be succinct, which I rarely am, I would say we're soil farmers, right? Like if we take care of the soil, everything else will work out.
So you're working with ag allies to monitor bird populations on your farm. Can you tell me a little bit about that collaboration and the transformation that's taken place as you've
Yeah,
pasture raised your
yeah.
livestock?
Ag Allies is it's a nonprofit government partnership, and they started because Maine, like a lot of areas, are losing bobolinks, right? And the bobolinks are grassland nesting birds. So they're literally having their babies, they're building their nest in tall grasses and having their babies, and then the babies fly away. They're an amazing species. They fly all the way to Central America, right? So they're only here. They arrive in like late May, they have their babies, and then they're out of here by early July. But they need those tall grasses. So, what can I say about that? So we had another wildlife biologist that walked the farm a couple years after we had been here. So we had started the process of restoration, and that person had said, "I've seen more bobolinks here than I've seen, like, anywhere else in Maine." So we contacted them, and they came out and started doing the monitoring. But I think we're at, like, a doubling rate. We have an area set up. We don't graze that area during the nesting season. We have a prescribed area. We don't do what is a problem for a lot of grassland birds is what's called early haying. When you go to hay your pastures in like June, it's right when the birds are nesting. So it's really a habitat issue also. But yeah, I mean, they're at for several years they were at a doubling rate, and we'll see if that continues. But we've had ornithologists from Cornell come out and walk the land. We're going to be doing a bobolink celebration next June. If your listeners want to come by, I haven't announced the date yet, but we're going to let people come and do bird walks with our wildlife biologists that are helping to do the monitoring and just talk about it. Because I think people really need to hear positive agricultural stories, not just like humans are bad and humans are, destroying the land, but this is what can happen when you change the how of how you farm, right? And I think that also something that I would mention for people who aren't farmers out there is that with the rotational grazing, we might have chickens here and sheep and pigs, but they're each in these paddocks, right, with electric fence. And they can move around, they can do what they need to do, but it's somewhat contained. And then they move to the next spot. So what that means is you have lots and lots of open space, right, for wildlife all the time because you haven't totally covered the land with animals. And it's much different than continuous grazing where you put them in a huge area and they're just all over the place, right? So, and that impact that they do is actually really positive because it resets the grass and then they go on to the next spot. And actually, for the microbiome of the soil, there's differences in the qualities of what the chicken manure brings, or the cow manure, or the pig manure, right? And so that all feeds different life species of the microbiome of the soil also. So it's just really fascinating and hopeful. So for people that find themselves like really stuck and looking for hopeful solutions, I mean, regenerative agriculture, in my mind, it's better for the animals, it's better for the wildlife, it sequesters carbon. As your soil gains organic matter, your soil can hold more water when it rains, and so it's less. So you're better off for drought because you're holding water. You're also better off for flooding because that as that soil becomes spongy, as you increase your organic matter, then it's also, able to absorb water when you get those heavy rainfalls so areas don't flood. You know, I mean, it's just a win-win-win. And Kiss the Ground is a great film if people are interested in learning more about that. That's a good introductory film to regenerative ag.
So you've got a lot of different types of animals on your farm. What are the diets of some of the animals look like? Maybe for the pigs or the things that are going into your value added
Yeah,
products.
we're really focused on the pigs. So everybody knows like cows and sheep, they are herbivores. They have four stomachs. They're going to eat grass. End of story. Good deal. Then you have pigs that or chickens that are both monogastric. They have one stomach. So they eat grain. Our pigs eat grain. And then we're next to a brewery, so we get spent barley from the brewery waste and we feed that. We also have a supply of waste cheese that's fine, but would end up in the landfill, and we end up feeding that. So we use whatever our resources are available to use products and keep them out of the landfill. And pigs actually graze also. And if anybody would like to challenge me on that, I'm just going to send you a video because they do. They'll sit there and eat their salad, right? They'll eat the grass, and they're getting some nutrition out of that, but they can't survive on just grass. And what we've seen is that we got a SARE grant a few years back when we were still in Missouri, but we did omega-3, omega-6 ratios with our SARE grant on our pigs. And we had pigs on pasture on a full grain diet, pigs on pasture on a reduced grain diet, and pigs on pasture with no grain, right? So the omega-3, omega-6 ratios were the very best with no grain, right? But they were still, if you compare it to conventional pigs, right? Like a feedlot, not even a feedlot pig, like a pig that's in a CAFO where they never see the light of day, those ratios are like 28 to 1, 30 to 1 of omegas 6s to 3s, right? And so, but ours were coming back. The very best was 5 to 1. But even, I mean, I'd have to look at the grant report because it's online if anybody wants to check it out. We were singing Prairie then, and it was with Sarah. But I think even the pigs that had grain, as long as they had pasture and they were doing some grazing, it was like, I'm going to say it was like 10 to 1. Maybe it was 15. But let's say it was 15. That's twice as good, right? Like it's wonderful. So I'm a big fan of pasture raised agriculture if you were just talking about human health, right? But it's not just that. It's also what the animal, the quality of the life of the animal, the domesticated animal, and the quality of life for the rest of the ecosystem, especially if it's managed correctly. Anybody, I mean, you can put any animal on pasture and have poor management and still turn it into like a total mud lot. And I've seen that. I've been to places people are like, oh, this is a really good farm. And I walk around and I'm like, I see an awful lot of dirt everywhere. Like you're not really managing your pastures, right? But even with that, I sometimes have compassion because people get into desperate situations where they're trying to make a living. They're trying to raise as many animals as they can, and so sometimes they don't end up having enough land or they're not rotating enough because they're time strapped, so it still takes care and attention, but I'm a big fan of all things grass fed and pasture raised.
Can you tell me a little bit about the products you create? And for those viewers that might not know, what is a value added product?
Yeah, value added product is anything that takes a resource and then moves it up the financial chain so it's worth more money. So you're going to make more money selling beer than you are growing hops, right? That is an easy way to understand it. So in the United States, one of the grants that I was able to get that other farmers can get is called a value added producer grant, and it is one of the, I think, best parts of the USDA. It's not a huge pool, but it gives farmers an opportunity to take whatever it is they're making, whether you're growing apples or tomatoes or whatever, and create a value added product that you could sell to a larger market, right? So that can help with a number of things. One, with shelf stability. We've been chicken farmers before and had eggs. Like when you have the chickens like to turn on and turn off, as you know, where all of a sudden you have a ton of eggs, or then like it gets really hot and you have no eggs at all. But when you have a value added product, usually you can turn it into something with a longer shelf life. So that in itself is a win. Our value added products, our farm, our first value added product was meat snack stick. So it was a pasture raised pork snack stick. My husband came back from a food conference and said, "Oh, there's lots of grass fed beef sticks out there, but there's no pasture raised pork." So we started to make one, and we really had no idea what we were doing. And I said in that intro that you read that we didn't have any startup money. We were bootstrapped. We got our startup money, the very first loan. Somebody said you had to have something, and I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, we took out a what is it? Took out a loan for $30,000 and used my husband's pickup truck as collateral. So that was our actual first startup money. But that was it. And it's been a long and windy road. It is. I'm not going to necessarily encourage everybody to go start a brand because I feel like I went out of the out of the frying pan and into the fire in some ways. It turns out value-added products also come with their own set of high risk. Um, and like touch wood, we're still here. So we're doing Rome sticks. They're pasture raised pork snack sticks that we sell on our website, singingpastures.com. We also sell to some of the e-commerce grocery stores like Thrive Market, Misfits Market, Imperfect Foods. We just got into Sprouts nationwide, and we're looking to go into some other grocery stores. So obviously, this is not all from our farm anymore. We also buy from other pasture-based farmers, which is just part of getting more good meat out there into the world. And we make a salami. We have two varieties of salamis also, which are mostly just available at our website.
What makes your products unique?
So I'm going to start with the snack sticks because that's our hero product line. I would say two things. To the best of my knowledge, for what you can buy at a grocery store, we're still the only pasture raised pork snack stick. And in my mind, factory farming of pork is the worst of all the factory farms. They produce a ton of manure, and if that manure is not going into the ground and causing grass to grow and revitalizing the soil, then it's probably going into a pit someplace. And that's where you get into these huge problems like in North Carolina, not this awful storm, but a previous awful storm that they had, where North Carolina has a ton of pig factory farms. They're owned by Smithfield, and they have their pits break and then they go into the water supply, right? So one is just the quality of the pork. And even in pork, sometimes people will say, well, it's ABF pork, which means antibiotic free. It might be a little bit better. They're still raised in confinement. All that means is that they don't have antibiotics in their feed every single day of their life. That's all that means. So one, quality of the meat is so much better. Two, this is something that I'm really proud of. Our pasture raised pork sticks are slow fermented and then they're slow smoked for 16 hours with real hickory wood. So they are made at a USDA certified plant. I am not doing this in my basement somewhere, but we're doing it the old fashioned way, right? And most of the other big, even healthy competitor brands use something called encapsulated lactic acid or encapsulated citric acid, and that's there's the encapsulate is a sub ingredient. It's the encapsulate in that acid is a coating that goes around the acid that is partially or fully hydrogenated, either palm oil or seed oil. And so that is in what people are eating and they don't know it. And I think that's a problem when we don't tell people what's in the food because it's hidden. Most of the other, like even healthy competitor snack stick brands, are made with liquid smoke. So I know what these plants are like. I've been in them, and it comes in a bucket and you pour it in. It's not real smoke. So in my mind, when you make things, the way that you make things also affects the nutrition and the taste, right? So our snack sticks have a more depth of flavor, they have more complex flavors because even though it's just a snack stick, I mean, what is a snack stick really? It's a sausage. All snack sticks are basically just a sausage. It's meat stuffed into a casing. But they taste better and they're better for you because we don't have some kind of crappy ingredients hidden inside.
You're part of a team that was recently selected for a sustainable agriculture research and education grant. Can you tell me a little bit more about the research that grant will fund?
Yes. So this is a project by Stone Barns, which is a nonprofit out of New York. And they're really interested in how we can decrease food waste and at the same time, help farmers and see what that does to, if we feed food waste to animals, what does that do to the nutrient density? So I've written my own SARE grants in the past. This is a much bigger project, and all credit to them. We were selected because we've done two previous SARE grants on our own about nutrient density. The pork one I talked about, and then before that, we did an egg layer one. Um, but anyway, that project is we're going to be getting organic grain. We're going to be doing, they've got all the apps and how we're going to, quantify everything and do the data to be able to really monitor what the animals are eating. We're going to have one group of pigs, we're going to have another group of egg layers, and there we're going to use um, you know different kinds of waste. So as I mentioned earlier, we have brewery waste, we have cheese. I know they have a lot of vegetables that they're going to be able to feed. We might be able to come up with some waste vegetables. It's all about making the math work, that the time and energy it takes to get that food to you, works with your life. But we'll probably be adding that to our feed supplies also. So the waste, in addition to the grain for animals on pasture, then we're going to do nutrient density testing and see how it adds up compared to conventional pork or conventional eggs.
What are some of the ways you were able to fund the growth of your business?
By the skin of our teeth sometimes. One of the ways early on that we were able to fund ourselves was I did a Kickstarter in 2016. And when I was doing our Kickstarter, there was a company called ButcherBox, which is out of Boston, which a lot of people probably have heard of, that was brand new. Like they had just launched the week before us. So we had called them to say, hey, will you give us any advice on how to run a Kickstarter? And it was really like the two guys that were starting it at that point. And then while my husband was on the phone with them, he is a very proud about his farming and enthusiastic. So he said, look, you should buy sausage from us because I have the best pig farm in the world. And they said, great, we'll do a SKU of pasture raised pork sausage from you all. So it started out as like 500 pounds every other month. And then they kept growing because they're really marketers and sellers. And so then it went from us to us and our neighbors and our Amish neighbors. And then it went from us and our Amish neighbors to, learning about some of the medium scale pasture raised pork supply chains around the country. So we worked with them for several years and that helped fund the brand. In fact, we wouldn't have been able to do it without doing that account. And we were just one SKU for them. The rest of their stuff comes from Nyman Ranch, which is owned by Purdue, which I guess I can talk about Nyman now. We don't work with them. So Nyman it's definitely better than factory farming. Like I know some of those guys, right? They're independent farmers. They're dirt pigs. They have conventional feed. It's like one step, in my mind, it's like a step below pasture raised, but definitely a step up from factory farms. Um, but anyway, we worked with them for years, and then during the COVID pandemic, their sales went through the roof. And for their own supply chain security, they just decided to go with Nyman for everything. Plus, at that point, I think in some ways we were the green halo, right? We would send in our pig pictures, and John would, talk to people and say, yes, I do this product. And, you know, but they didn't need us anymore. So anyway, does that answer your question? So that was so getting a white label product, it wasn't under our brand, that really helped. And that got us going to a certain point. And then we've also funded it through, business loans, so that's where we're at.
How did you scale up production to make your products available nationwide?
Um, so I think everybody has a different, way that they do this. So for us, like first of all, some people start in their kitchen, and they're making something, but they're maybe under, rules of like their local farmers market, or maybe they're under FDA. As a meat product, we're under the USDA. USDA is way more serious than the FDA. Like, no joke, right? They're pretty strict. So from the very beginning, we had to be at a USDA plant. So we've gone to several different plants, and there just weren't that many plants in the country that were doing fermented and slow smoked, because I knew I didn't want to do the encapsulated acid, because I'm also, as I mentioned earlier, I'm an acupuncturist. I just really don't think people need any synthetic trans fats in their life. So yeah, so we were at a plant where that was able to scale up. We had the connections, and we learned a lot of it is who you know, learned about who to call for getting meat, and with working with those supply chains. And then everything else has just been a continuous process of figuring it out as we go along. So the marketing, the branding, we've certainly gotten a lot of help from a lot of people, but it's just like, in some ways I like wake up and I'm like, what new thing do I have to learn today? And I promise you, I'm really bad at a lot of things. And my motto is like, some people say, if you can't do it well, don't do it at all. My motto is do it poorly until you can do it like mediocre. And then maybe one day you can do it like pretty well, right? So we go for it 80%. If I can get it 80% of the way there, I'm like, okay, good enough. And then I've often like rested on the fact that like people I think sometimes can be a little more forgiving with us because we really are a family farm. And so, I like literally I still do the support emails. So people write to me, I'm the CEO. I'm also like, hey, I'm sorry you didn't get your product. Like, FedEx messed up. It looks like it's stuck in, Virginia or whatever, right? So anyway, I think people have been very gracious with us as we have grown, but that's how we did it.
What are some of the challenges you encountered on your journey and how do you overcome them?
From a farming perspective, I think that the challenge for all our small and medium farmers is financial. And I think we don't talk about it enough. I think that in our fervor about loving local and regional food, which I think is the very best, we like want to pretend like things are okay out there. And I'm going to tell you right now, I do not think things are okay. We have seen farmers markets like plateauing. The sales are not going up. Actually, if you go to your local farmer's market, probably the people that are doing the best are the ones selling the tacos or the soap, right? Like it is extremely hard to make it to support a two-family income on a family farm. And we know Joel Salatin from doing some work with him in the past, and he once said to me, a family farm should be able to support at least two farm jobs at $50,000 a piece. And I feel like our small farms across the country are not hitting that mark. I would really like to see them hit that mark. So the challenge is like I feel like farmers have to be extremely realistic about their finances because there's a reason there are suicide hotlines for farmers. It's both your identity, it's your job, it's your family's land, maybe. I've talked to lots of young farmers that are starting out, and just because you start out, a lot of them think, oh, if only I had the land, then I can make it. I'm like, that's just the beginning. Like getting the land, and then you need to make it profitable. And I think that you can figure out whatever method you need to. Some people have wedding venues with their farm. Some people do Airbnb. Some people write books and do magazines and speaking gigs. We do a value added product. Some people have a job where they're a doctor and an anesthesiologist that they go do 4 days a week and then they farm. So do it however you need to do it, but make sure your family's finances are taken care of. And I think that is the most challenging thing for farms. And I don't think we talk about it enough because we all believe in the mission so much. I think that gets downplayed a lot. And I've just seen behind closed doors, people will talk to me with things they wouldn't talk to their customers about because nobody wants to go out and tell a sad sack story while I'm trying to sell you something. I want to be able to tell you all the wonderful things, and the chicken was named Fred and I gave him foot massages every day, right? Like that's what we want to hear. We don't want to hear like I had to go on food stamps in the winter because there was no money coming in. and I have heard many of those stories as well. So that's that the challenges I think are we need to make sure we're taking care of our farmers so they have things like, they can pay off their house and have a retirement.
What are some of the greatest lessons you've learned from growing your business over the years?
So with the challenge that I just said, I mean, I think the lesson that I've learned is I'm in my 50s, and I think just that I've had to be able to reinvent myself over and over and over. And that is wildly uncomfortable sometimes. When you hit a wall and you're like, how am I going to figure this next thing out? It's not like the skies open up and the light comes through and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, now I've got this inspiration. It is a much slower, step by step, you crawl until you can walk kind of process. Um, so I think that that has built resilience in both me and my husband. I mean, I think that we have had to go on faith a lot of the time, not just faith that like it'll all be okay, but faith, that if we do our part and we explain our vision and we tell people what we're doing, that we will find other people who feel the same way and who will want to step in and join us in that. And I am a lot about trying to paint the picture of the world that you want to see and how we can all be a part of it, rather than say this is about Holly and John's farm or the Smith's farm or whatever, right? Like we really all sometimes we look at each other's farms and we think we're in competition, like if you're at the farmer's market, but really we're all on the same team. The people that are not on our team. I'll tell you who's not on your team. Smithfield's not on your team. Hormel's not on your team. JBS, the biggest beef producer in the world that's out of Brazil, they're not on your team, right? And so we've all got an uphill battle against corporate agriculture, right? And everything is stacked against us on purpose. This didn't happen by accident. That's another whole class, right? But it is extremely hard when it is stacked against you to make a living farming. So you've just got to have a lot of grit and the willingness to get up and say, I'm going to make it a good day.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience. And I mean, I guess I would say go to our website at singingpastures.com. That is the best way people can support us. If you have a question, you know where to find me. Go to support at singingpastures.com. You'll get me and I will answer your question. I get some funny questions sometimes, but I'm happy to do it because I understand that there are a lot of people out there that really care about their food. I think food is scary, especially right now. There's so many weird rules around food, and we want to believe that our government, I'm going to say this, we want to believe that our government is protecting us from bad stuff in food, and it's not. It's really up to the consumer to whatever your belief systems about food, whatever is okay and not okay. You just have to be really conscious about your choices and what you want to buy. And I'm not saying to buy the most expensive food. Sometimes the most expensive food is not the best food. Whiskey can be pretty expensive. That might not be the best thing for you. But just to make really clear choices because you're investing in your own health, right? Which is the one thing you get to keep, for as long as we're on the planet.
Thank you so much for joining the podcast today, Holly. Really appreciate your time and for all the great work that you're doing at Singing Pastures.
All right. Thank you very much.